Quakes only at night. An Antarctic ice shelf is being shaken by thousands of ice quakes, but the strange thing is that it's only happening at night. This is a follow-up to an article that we had last week. This is on Science Alert by Peter Dockrell. Today's article: as a frozen Antarctic landscape at the bottom of the world in the South Pole adjusts to an even hotter planet, we keep finding more mysterious phenomena beneath and within the ice. Now there are what they're calling ice quakes to add to this list. It was not so long ago that earthquakes were thought to not exist in this unforgiven continent. Well, we know that there's over 100 volcanoes there, so wherever you have volcanoes, you do have seismic activity as well. So scientists now know better and have just reported another tremulous anomaly, tremors, that is, ice quakes that shake the frozen area, this landscape. But the thing is that they only happen at night, when darkness falls. For a 6 to 12 hour period during the evening, scientists investigating the behavior of ice at the American station, the McMurdo Ice Shelf, picked up these mysterious ice quake vibrations thanks to the seismometers planted across the shelf landscape. In these areas, they say, we would record tens, hundreds, up to thousands of these per night. Thousands per night? This is what the glaciologist Douglas Mikhail from the University of Chicago says. Amazing. Up to thousands per night. It's Mikhail's business to study how meltwater and melting processes are affecting the Antarctic region. While it might sound surprising, it's actually melting that's responsible for setting off the nightly cavalcade of quakes. Now we know that the fact is that some of these stations are on ice shelves, that one of them has to relocate because of the cracking ice. They have to relocate their whole station somewhere else. As you can understand, this is a tremendous expense because they have to reset their buildings and their energy and their food supply, everything, their power supply, somewhere else. Now, during this austral summer melt season, which is November 2016 to January 2017, the researchers set up seismometers in 2 different locations, 20 kilometers apart, or that is just 12 miles apart from each other, on the McMurdo Ice Shelf. They called the sites the dry station and the wet station, in reference to how much melting behavior the areas exhibited. At the wet station, the slushy ice produced pools of water on the ground during the day, whereas the dry station was notably less prone to the meltwater despite the heat of the sunlight. But that was not the only difference observed between these two environments. Each night, the wet station became alive with hundreds or even thousands of fleeting ice quakes generated by natural activity and lasting less than a second each time. A second is pretty big anyway. By contrast, seismic activity detected in the dry station was markedly different and seemed to be caused by human activity, probably vehicles on a nearby road used by the research team, for example. Now, as for the quakes at the wet station, it's not the first time scientists have observed diurnal cycles of seismicity on the ice shelf like this, but it's never before been linked with ice shelf melting and surface hydrology, which is what the researchers propose is going on here. Well, that's what they think. I mean, it could be something else. What happens if it's for example, heating from underground that's causing the ice shelves to quake? There's obviously volcanoes, over 100 there, and it could be that there's also seismic activity. Who knows? This is just one of their hypotheses. It's the melting, they say. Mikhail says, in these ponds, there's often a layer of ice on top of melted water below, like you see with a lake that's only frozen on the top. As the temperature cools at night, the ice on the top contracts and the water below expands as it undergoes freezing. This warps the top lid until it finally breaks with a snap. The seismic phenomenon could ultimately help scientists remotely monitor glacier melting, the researchers hypothesize, because wherever the ice quakes are springing up, that's also where melting processes are the strongest. Backing up their admittedly modest seismometer deployment with models that simulated the same phenomena, the team conclude that thermally regulated seismicity may exist on all ice shelves that undergo surface melting and freezing, especially those that have lost their protective insulating firn layer. He says, of course, for now, the team's explanation is probably best viewed as a hypothesis until further evidence comes along to support it one way or another. Tragically, however, we might not have to wait too long. With Antarctica now rapidly melting all over the place, there's never been a better time to investigate the origin of these dark tremors. The findings from this report were reported in the Annals of Glaciology. And just a few days before, that is March 5th, scientists reported in, as described the article in Life Science, scientists pinned down the cause of mysterious ice quakes shaking in Antarctica. This was reported by Stephanie Pappas. Now, it says for part of the summer parts in Antarctica, the ice melts into a swampy, slushy stew and refreezes as the temperature rises and falls, and as it melts, it generates hundreds of thousands of tiny little ice quakes. And she says now scientists have captured the daily pattern of these miniature tremors using the same kind of seismographs used to detect earthquakes. They find the ice quakes are caused by the sudden snap of frozen films of ice covering pools of slush. In these pools, there's often a layer of ice on top of melted water below, like you see with a lake that's only frozen on top. As the temperature cools at night, the ice on top contracts and the water below expands as it undergoes freezing, and this warps the top lid until it finally breaks with a snap. And Mikhail and his team were interested in the daily rhythms of the ice because little is known about the mechanics of a breakup of a large ice sheet. Such breakups have occurred in Antarctica multiple times over the past decades. The Larsen C ice shelf calved an enormous iceberg into the Weddell Sea in 2015. The nearby Larsen B shelf collapsed unexpectedly in 2002. When floating ice sheets collapse, they don't directly contribute to sea level rise because they were already in a marine environment, but they do allow the land-bound glaciers behind the ice sheets to flow faster, dumping more meltwater into the sea. The researchers were also interested in testing seismometers as a way to monitor the melting ice, and they developed two near McMurdo Station at the edge of McMurdo Ice Shelf. One seismometer station was positioned at a dry location where the surface was covered with fern, and previous years snow slowly hardened and compacting into glacial ice, and the other was put on a wet, boggy location where the ice was rotten and partially melted. At the wet location, the surface was often coated with a thin layer of ice over pools of slush and meltwater big enough to swallow an adult. Can you imagine? And the instruments recorded tremors at these two stations between November 2016 and January 2017, and they recorded snaps and pops. The patterns at the two spots could not have been any more different. The dry station was seismically peaceful. The only tremors detected there were linked to vehicle or ship traffic around McMurdo Station. And the wet station, though, the seismographs picked up hundreds of thousands of tiny earthquakes, sometimes thousands in one night, and these quakes were generally below the 2.5 magnitude. Well, that 2.5 is not that small, I'm sorry. For an ice quake, 2.5. So they were generally below 2.5 magnitude, at which tremors became noticeable to humans, though people in Antarctica sometimes hear the cracking of the ice. This is according to U.S. Geological Survey. Strangely, the earthquakes followed a daily pattern. They would increase in frequency for a couple of hours each evening. And the researchers thought the daily quakes peaks might have to do with the tides, but one discrepancy ruled out that notion. November 30, 2016, the spike in ice quakes did not happen. When the researchers tracked daily temperature over the study time frame, they found that the quakes peaks corresponded with periods of dropping mercury, In November 30th, it so happened that the temperature warmed instead of chilled over the course of the evening. And what's likely happening, Mikhail said, is that the air gets colder, the slushy melted ponds below the thin air of the surface ice start to freeze, and as they freeze, they expand, putting pressure on the surface ice, and finally the surface ice snaps like a potato chip, sending tiny, undetectable to humans tremors all along the surface. These findings on a small scale are intriguing, Mikhail said, because more icebergs calve off ice shelves during cold weather compared to warmer weather. And he said perhaps this is happening at longer, slower scales. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.